I'm Tanya Peel. I'm creating a show mixed with family recipes and vintage finds. When I find a vintage dish, I'm always wondering, if you could talk, what would your story be? Where did you come from, and whose hands have touched you? Whose home have you been in, and how far did you travel to get to me? After discovering a new vintage piece, I'm almost always thinking about a meal my mom or granny prepared for me, how that made me feel to eat something so delicious made with love, and how I can serve up my own creations to feed my family and friends. It's how I show love. So if you think about it, it makes sense to blend the two, because every dish has a story.
Episode 4, The Timeless Tale of Rolling Pins and Chess Pie. Leavened or flat, braided or rolled. Dough connects us, not to just each other, but to the hands of every ancestor who mixed, shaped, and baked before us. Today we're rolling through time, quite literally. Ever wonder who first flattened dough with a hunk of rock? Or how we went from stone to sculpted wood and marble? Well, grab your apron. We're going deep into the history of the rolling pin, and we're ending with something delicious. A chess pie so good you'll forget your manners and lick the plate. Before stainless steel and silicone, imagine this. 6,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia, a cook picks up a smooth cylinder of stone and flattens barley grain for a sacred flatbread. That's our first known rolling pin. The Etruscans used stone, heavy, uneven, but effective. Ancient rollers like this weren't fancy, they were functional. The Chinese had early wooden versions. While the exact date of the first rolling pin in Chinese culture is not precisely recorded, simple cylindrical dough rolling tools were likely used by at least the Han Dynasty, possibly earlier. These early pins were straight rods made from wood and bamboo, and their design persists in traditional Chinese cooking today. In India, the balan is still an indispensable tool. The first detailed descriptions of dough preparation tools come from medieval culinary texts in South Asia. While the balan isn't named specifically, the process of flattening dough for roti and puri is described, implying the use of rolling tools. Fast forward to 18th century Europe. In both England and France, cookbooks and household manuals begin to mention rolling pins directly. No longer just implied tools, but essential ones. The form becomes familiar: smooth, carved wood, sometimes with turned handles, often shaped on a foot power lathe. French culinary texts even call them by name, la rouleau à pâtisserie, the pastry roller. These references often appear alongside detailed engravings of pastry chefs, rolling out fine layers of dough for tarts and puff pastry. This 1790 cookbook is a perfect example, filled with pastry instructions that mention rolling and folding by hand. As European settlers crossed the Atlantic, so did their tools, and the rolling pin was no exception. In colonial American kitchens, rolling pins were hand-carved from local woods like maple or walnut, often passed down through generations. They were used to roll dough for everything from hearty meat pies to flaky apple tarts, shaped by recipes carried over from England, France, and Germany. Over time, American tinsmiths and woodworkers began adding innovations, like turned handles and even hollowed cores, making the start of a uniquely American evolution of the rolling pin. Americans were patenting their creations left and right. The first patent rolling pin in U.S. records is from 1865, focusing on improved construction. It reflects the gradual shift towards formalizing kitchen tool design. This is a picture of a patented self-cooling rolling pin from 1872. Glass rolling pins weren't just kitchen tools, they were keepsakes, especially popular with sailors. These hollow glass pins served a dual purpose, practical in the galley and sentimental at sea. Sailors would bring them home as gifts, sometimes hand-painted with ships, flowers, or sweet sayings. In coastal homes, a glass rolling pin on the shelf wasn't just for baking, it was a token of love and safe return. In fact, glass rolling pins were often filled with spices, rice, salt, and even flour as gifts for the sailors' sweethearts. Even whalebone was made into rolling pins. It was a readily available material for sailors. They would carve intricate designs and scenes into the whalebone, a practice known as scrimshaw. It's worth noting because when will I ever speak about whalebone again? It was also used exclusively in corsets during the 19th century to achieve the fashionable tight-waisted silhouette. While researching rolling pins, I learned about a woman named Judy Reed. I read in several places that she invented the rolling pin. This isn't exactly accurate. We have learned that the rolling pin has been around for thousands of years, but I do want to mention this woman's incredible achievements because she went further than just a rolling pin. Miss Judy Reed was the first African-American woman to receive a United States patent in 1884, securing her place in culinary history with her invention of a dough kneader and roller. The machine used revolving, grooved rollers to press, knead, and smooth dough in a single manual operation. It was a smart, labor-saving step forward, especially at a time when most baking was done by hand and muscle. Miss Judy Reed stands as a symbol of hidden genius, an innovator whose contribution to culinary tools broke ground in both technology and representation, even as her full story remains untold. This rolling pin is a fascinating piece of late 19th to early 20th century British kitchenware. It's a ceramic advertising rolling pin, and the messages are quite cute. You must use Kilvert's pure lard if you want good pastry. I'm sure part of a promotional slogan. And Kilvert's lard was most certainly an English lard, branded and crafted and sold throughout Britain in the Victorian era. Some of the other messages are antidote for indigestion, Coombs aerated pastry flour, to make beer at home from Mason's extract herbs, absolutely pure Hallbro Lily Hill baking powder. I'm imagining these rolling pins were probably given away or sold as promotional kitchen items, perhaps through butchers, grocers, or baking suppliers. Now this old rolling pin isn't just a kitchen tool, it's a family heirloom. It's rolled out biscuits and pie crusts for over 6 generations, and every nick in the wood tells a story. I was gifted this family treasure 2 years ago by Tom, my first cousin once removed. It belonged to my great-grandmother, Ina Betty Gillum Peel. It was passed down to Ina by her family. The history goes it was carved out of a tree on the Gillum land, and it's encroaching on 150 years old now. Granny Peel loved to cook with her old hand-me-down rolling pin. Whenever the family would get together for the holidays, all the grandkids would be playing together, often underfoot and sometimes not behaving. Now Tom claims he was never in trouble with grandmother because he was her favorite, but apparently my father David was mischievous and always in trouble. Granny Peel would raise her rolling pin and shake it at my dad and tell him if he didn't behave, she was going to jerk a knot in his head. Apparently the kids were never sure if she would actually do it or not, but the threat made them all behave. Well, my father grew up to be an Air Force colonel, so I guess the power of Granny Peel's rolling pin was a good motivator. Welcome to the world of chess pie. This pie is humble and it's been around for generations. It's made from what you got on hand. But don't let that fool you. It's been gracing Sunday tables, church picnics, and family reunions for over 100 years. Most folks agree it's a Southern classic, but no one can quite agree on where the name came from. Some say it's a play on just pie, as in someone walked in and said, "What kind of pie was it?" And the cook just replied, "Just pie." Others think it might have been stored in a pie chest, those wooden cabinets with screens that keep the flies off. So chess pie became chess pie. However it got its name, it became a staple across the South by the 1800s, especially in places where fresh food and fancy ingredients weren't always on hand. The first printed recipe for chess pie appears in a newspaper in 1866 by Miss Samuel P. May out of Grimes County, Texas. The first cookbook recipe was printed in the Dixie Cookbook in 1883. I'm sure the pie was being made well before those dates. The name chess pie may not have been standardized until later. I have looked at many recipes with similar ingredients, with names of transparent pie, vinegar pie, buttermilk pie, and Jeff Davis pie. Transparent pie recipes are printed in 1838. I believe the origins of this pie came from Europe probably by the way of custard puddings and pies. All these pies share a common theme, a simple custard base of cream, sugar, butter, and eggs. What makes a chess pie is usually the cornmeal and an acid like vinegar, lemon, or buttermilk. Those ingredients set it apart from other custard pies. Chess pie is richer, sweeter, denser, and slightly more textured than other custard pies. Y'all, it's just plain delicious, and it is easy to make. We're going to honor the evolution of the pen by making something timeless, a flaky hand-rolled crust. I like to make my own pie dough because I think this is what makes a pie special. Sometimes you got to work for the sweeter things in life. Now, there are as many pie dough recipes and techniques as there are old recipe cards tucked into biscuit tins. What I would say is you have to explore and see what works best for you. Even the best cooks and the chefs get it wrong from time to time. It has more to do with chemistry and technique than your recipe. The real difference is the baker's touch, timing, and temperature control. Since learning about a lady by the name of Shirley Corriher from my mom, I have been thrilled with learning new techniques about baking. I had never really strayed from a basic pie crust recipe, but I really love this crust. I also recommend Shirley's cookbook as a part of your collection. What I found interesting is that online, there aren't any videos of people making this crust, or at least I missed them. There are a few times that her recipes are noted, and people talk about her and her techniques all the time in blogs and websites. So I'm excited to bring that to you today. So let's get busy making pie. So we're going to take 1 3/4 cups of regular all-purpose flour. Got my cute little jadeite mixing cups. And then next, we're going to use Wondra. Wondra has less protein, which means that it forms less gluten. Less gluten equals more tender, melt-in-your-mouth crust without being crumbly. So we're going to take 1/2 cup of Wondra flour. All right. Next, we need 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to give this just a little whisk. And I'm using a stainless steel bowl instead of a glass bowl. You could see everything better, but I'm going to be putting this in the freezer, which is one of the techniques that I'll be sharing with you. And so this conducts the temperature much better than the glass bowl, I find. So next we're going to get our butter and we're going to plop this. It's already pre-cut. We're going to plop this in the flour. So you want your butter that's been in the refrigerator super cold, and coat it with the flour, and then we're going to put it back in the freezer for 10 minutes. In it goes. All right, it's been 10 minutes, and I'm going to dump this. You can do it on your countertop, but I like to have this silicone mat. I'm not even sure this is silicone because it's so old, it's Tupperware. I doubt they had silicone back then. Plastic mat probably, but it was my grandmother's and I like using it. And it helps you not make such a mess. So then you take your cold flour and butter and you dump it out on your mat, right? This is another reason I like this. And then you're going to take your rolling pin and you're going to roll the butter into the flour. But what you're trying to achieve is like paint chips, and you'll see that as I go along. So you just kind of work it. Got to put some muscle into it because the butter is really cold, but this is what you want. So you see how you kind of just roll the pin around? See how it makes it into like a paint chip? It's super thin, right? So that's what you're doing. And that's why I encourage you to have a silicone mat or an old Tupperware mat. See, it's a few more steps than the regular crust. I know a lot of people like to whip their crust out in like a food processor and that kind of thing. Try something different for a change. It's really about flavor. This pie crust has a lot of really great flavor. It's different because it uses ingredients that I've never put in a pie crust. It uses sour cream. Sour cream is basically acting as an acid, right? Which calms the gluten, I believe, is the scientific thing that's happening there. The more gluten that forms when you're doing a pie crust is what can make it not tender. All right, so this is the first good go around. So then you have this, and you'll see, and I just knock it off. Now Shirley may have had another technique that she did for this. I don't know because I don't know her and I've never seen her make this pie crust before, but this is kind of what, when I read her cookbook, this is kind of like what was going on in my head. And then why the mat is cool to have is for this. So then you just plop it back into the bowl. Back in the freezer it goes for 5 minutes. All right, so I just took out my flour from the freezer for 5 minutes and we're gonna dump back on the table. And we're gonna give it another mush, another roll. And you start to see that they really are flecking up just like paint chips everywhere, which is kind of cool. Now, at this stage, we want to add our lard or shortening. I have shortening. And we have 2 tablespoons that we're going to incorporate into this flour mixture. Now, lard will never completely firm up out of the freezer because of the fatty acid composition. Everybody's like, yay, why don't I just go buy a pie crust? You can do that if you must. I have several family members who don't like to make their own pie crust anymore, who buy it from the store. I won't tell. All right, back in the bowl. So back in the freezer it goes for 10 minutes now. So the recipe calls for 4 double graham crackers. So full crackers, 4 of those, and I have them broken up, and we want to food process them into a fine crumb. And we're basically going to roll this into the bottom of the crust, and it gives an interesting taste and texture, which I really like. And we're going to get our next ingredients out. So we have our very cold butter and shortening rolled into our flour. Now we're going to put sour cream, 8 ounces of sour cream into this dough mixture, and we're going to blend it in. If it doesn't get moist enough, which it should, I didn't need milk when I made this the first time. You have cold milk, up to 2 tablespoons of whole cold milk that you can add in, similar as you would do with water. So you don't want to overstir, you want to get it just incorporated. That's the thing that's really tricky about pie doughs, because you never know how your flour is stored, whether it's going to have a higher moisture content to it, even though we're talking about a dried good, or it's super dry. And so when recipes for a pie dough crust call for a tablespoon of cold water, or sometimes even up to a 1/4 cup, again, there's a million crust recipes, and you follow that, sometimes your crust will be either under hydrated or overhydrated. And so it's really a feel when you're dealing with your pie crust, and you want it enough to where it's sticking together, right? I think that this seems to be enough hydration and we don't even need the milk. So I'm going to pour it out. I'm going to cut it in half and store the 2 pieces. So now you can just form it into a disc, right? All right, and in these go for at least 30 minutes or overnight preferably. So we're going to preheat the oven to 400 because we're going to pre-bake this crust at 400. I took my pie dough out of the refrigerator to give it like 5 minutes to come up to a little bit of a temperature, but we still want it pretty cold. It's important to note the size of your pie plate that you're going to be using, because when you roll your dough out, you want to roll your dough at least 1 inch larger than your pie plate so you have enough for your crust. And you want to always make sure that you have floured your countertop or your mat. And I like to always have just a little more on the side. So we're going to take a little flour and just lightly flour the top. So I like to get it somewhat started with this thinner rolling pin. So you just want to go slow. Keep it in a circle as best as you can. Before you get it to the size that you want, we have that graham cracker action happening. So you want to take a little flour, just a little, roll it in on the top, and then you want to gently take this dough and just kind of fold it over and set it to the side. And then we want to get our graham crackers and we want to place it on our dough mat. And then we're going to roll this into the bottom of the pie dough. You want to take your pie dough and then open it up. And then we're going to just roll it into the pie dough. So then you see how it's on the back side of it. So they pick up very gently. And you want to just make sure that it falls into the corners evenly. And you can see how I have just enough all around the edges. You want to take your excess and fold it under, all the way around. So I like to take my knuckle and my 2 fingers like claws, and I like to push my knuckle into the pie crust and then crimp around my knuckle. So you just do it really slowly all the way around the pie crust. So you definitely want to have pie weights. If you don't have pie weights, you can use dried beans. And what I like to do is you can use foil or parchment paper. Push this into the bottom of the pie crust. Just pour your beans in. So we want to put this into the oven for 10 minutes with the pie weights and then take the weights out and allow it to cook for 5 more minutes. The first thing that we need to do is melt our butter. Okay, so 5 more minutes in the oven for the crust, and that's enough time to whip this chest pie out. So the first thing we have is 4 eggs. And I like to give them a quick whisk. And then we have 1.5 cups of sugar, 1/4 cup of milk, 2 tablespoons of cornmeal, a tablespoon of flour. We have a tablespoon of vinegar, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I like to give that another quick mix. We have a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract, but you all by now know how I feel about vanilla extract. I like vanilla paste. And now we have the butter. And because it's a little warm, I just like to drizzle it in as I stir the mix. And that's it. All right, so the pie will be cooking on 350 degrees, so we want to make sure that we take the temperature down to 350. All right, give this one good stir before we pour into our pie crust. All right, and in she goes. Yummy. So now it just needs to cool down. So you really want it to come fully down before you slice into it. But this looks really good. I'm super excited. All right, so the big reveal. You can see if you get really close here, the layers of how rolling the fat like paint chips really makes these flaky layers. So I want to turn it over first before I take a bite. And you can see the crust from that graham cracker lining. Wow, so good. It's a really good pie. Look at those layers.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Every Dish Has a Story. If you like what you see, please subscribe. I'd love your support. Take care.